Here we go again.
All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. And on today's show, I am joined by Garret Kramer. Garret, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast.
It's cool to be here, buddy. It's good to see you face to
Yeah,
face like this.
yes, definitely. And I've been really resonating with your message and the work that you're doing. I think it's so important, it's so phenomenal. And you know, I myself am very interested in sort of the exploration of consciousness. And I kind of wanted to start with this. And maybe it's a bit of a profound question. I'm kind of curious to see where you go with it. Like through your own exploration inward and sort of trying to understand the nature just of consciousness and, you know, what it means, like what is human nature? I mean, what have you been able to discover about yourself through the inward journey and sort of learning about your true nature and maybe how that differs from the world that is passed on to us or given to us, or it's sort of assigned to us, if you will.
Well, since you said it was profound, let's not beat around the bush. My It seems like lifelong exploration now um, has revealed to me that I do not experience through or on behalf of a body.
Mhm.
So is that profound enough?
I would say so. I mean,
So,
I would
so,
say so.
so no matter how much we want to get, or I want to get pulled back to that conditioning, that belief, I have no evidence. If I examine direct experience, which I'm sure we're going to go through here, I have no evidence that it is true that I experience on behalf of or through a body, let alone a person named Garret.
Mhm. Right.
So that's as good as I got, buddy. Like it there, and actually I would say there's nothing more important than that realization,
Mhm.
because from the illusory perspective of separateness or a separate self named Garret, I will then view the world as a separate world. I will view you as a separate person. In truth, not just the appearance of it, as an actual separate person. I will view uh, I will take the distinctions I see as actual, the diversity I see as actual.
Mhm.
And ultimately, from that perspective, that illusory perspective, but taking it as real, I will know suffering. I will know confusion. I will know suffering. And ultimately, I will know conflict.
Mhm.
Because if, in fact, I am a separate person, I'm coming first.
Right.
I could say all kinds of nice words. I could recommend all sorts of unification strategies and kumbaya strategies and all that. But ultimately, it's all bullshit. Ultimately, from that perspective, if that's actual, we will not survive, because ultimately it will be survival of the fittest, or survival of, as I describe it, the most cunning.
Right. Definitely. And I would definitely agree with you in that I feel like our societal foundation is pretty clearly built on this illusion of separation, the illusion of putting self first. And I think that's pretty evident just based on looking at history and also where we're just at right now. I mean, was there sort of a moment for you that you had this realization, and when you, and how you've sort of been able to integrate that.
What happened, there was a moment, and I write about it in the book I'm working on now. But when I when I was around 30, I opened up this business from where I'm speaking to you from, called Inner Sports. And Inner Sports at the time was a boutique sports psychology coaching business. Not that I have a doctorate in psychology or anything. I dropped out of psych stats my first semester in college. I couldn't handle it, right? But there's other reasons too. But be that as it may, actually, one of the, besides the statistical part of it, it was that I just couldn't relate to psychology as a study. I didn't know why, but now we've described it, because psychology is all built on the same misunderstanding you just described, that I am a separate psyche. We have separate psyches in truth. And that, just as we just discussed very briefly, which we can get into more hopefully, is simply not true.
Right.
Anyway, but I was a very good coach. In other words, I coached a prep school hockey team local here, a very good, one of the best teams in the state. I was a hockey player, and I had always coached along, my father managed a skating rink when I grew up. So I always coached. Like I always worked with the younger kids. I'd like to work with the younger kids. And then I coached all kinds of teams and everything like that. So I was kind of vacillating what to do with my life. And one of the options was always to become I was a high school hockey coach, perhaps a college hockey coach, perhaps a National Hockey League coach or something. And this was always, my father was also, by the way, awesome hockey coach. Still the best coach I've ever seen in my life, still. Well, there's one exception. One of my best friends, they're right there, named Brian Day, who coaches at Nobles and Greenhouse School in Boston. But be that as it may, I opened Inner Sports, and it was a perfect, it augmented my coaching. And many young hockey players in this area, because of my success on the ice with the team, would come here to talk about the so-called psychological and mental aspect of the game. And then that started to build into other athletes, not just hockey players. And then it started to build into college players and professional players. We have a professional team 20 minutes from here, the New Jersey Devils, their players, and then Giants and Jets, they're local here also, and in football, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I wrote a book called Stillpower, which was a self-published book, which was then bought by Simon & Schuster because it did pretty well. I actually don't recommend the book, by the way. I don't even like the book anymore, but as it may. That's how this all started. So now it's a long story to get to where I'm going to get to now.
Okay.
Through all the so-called successes, working on the PGA Tour, appearances on these various sport programs like Golf Channel and Fox Sports and all this stuff over and over, there was still something in the back of my mind that I knew I was missing. In other words, I had a pretty good way to coach and I was on 24/7. I always tell people, if they ever want to be in this business, the service business like this, don't turn your phone off. Like, don't even think that that's the thing you do. and it was dinner. Dinners were interrupted sometimes, and going to the movies with my wife Liz, sometimes that was interrupted, and whatever. My children's sports, they were all college athletes themselves. And I could be on the sidelines watching the game and still be on the phone. It all kind of worked. But about 10 years ago, it all came to a head. I was sitting in the other room here with a National Hockey League player in the summertime. And he was a long-term client of mine. I think like 10 years, actually. And he said to me, you know, Garret, I love being here. You really take me to my true self. And I thought, I've never used the term true self. Like, where is he coming up with the term true self? And he kept saying true self. And I'm thinking, as he's talking, I'm like, I don't know what that even means, true self. It's embarrassing, but I didn't even know the word. And at that point, I had always seen consciousness from a personal perspective, which is an abomination. So when I would talk about consciousness, I was talking about personal. I can't even say it because it's not even a thing because there is no personal consciousness. No person is conscious, but I knew I was kind of touching it, but I was personalizing it. And talking about levels of consciousness. And as you see it more, you'll deepen your understanding and grounding and all this bullshit. So he drove back. He was on his way to training camp, actually, when he was here. So he was driving through here, and he stopped by. And the minute he left, I came to this desk in the other room here, and I Googled true self. That's embarrassing, but that's okay. And this then opened up. This was the beginning of an ability to really serve people. I would say that it looked like I was doing that, but I don't really think I was. I think I kind of knew the game. I knew sport. I knew how to coach, but I kind of had a sense of spirit and God, but I wasn't really there enough and present enough to really be serving people. Ultimately, I was serving myself, if I'm honest.
Right. And when you speak of like the true self, I mean, would you want to dive into, because I think there's a lot of people who don't have that. You're not alone in the sense that a lot of people don't have that definition of true self. Like maybe the self is something that is very much like we talked about at the very beginning. We are individualizing our experience. It's all about me, and like you know, we want to work to make the world a better place, certainly, but I think we separate ourselves. So I mean, what is the true self from the, you know, if we're looking at our true human nature and truly who we are?
Well, be careful, Ev, because and language is difficult because we're all
It
conditioned to
is.
use a language to explain duality. That's the
Yeah.
whole issue with language, because we're explaining language is created to describe what's not true, which is another whole
Yeah.
podcast, by the way. But you said our human, what did you say? A human experience? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Human,
Yeah.
there is none. You
Mm.
see that's the thing. Like there is no human experience. A human being is a modulation within consciousness, within the true self, within God's infinite being. Thus, a human being cannot have an experience. A human being is experienced. A human being does not experience. A human being is known. A human being does not know. Now, so what is the true self? The true self, as I just said, is simply another word for consciousness, awareness, God's infinite being, love. That's who I am. Now, how can I say that with such certainty? Okay. Well, in order for me to be a separate self, separation would have to be true. And at this juncture, a separate object, what I mean by that is an object separate from the whole. So an object outside of consciousness, outside of the universe, outside of God, whatever word, again, would have to be a thing, would have to have been experienced. Now, I don't know about you, but can an object jump outside of the whole? Well, I guess we don't want to say unequivocally no, but I think what we would agree that we don't know of that. If that's ever happened, which is just almost impossible to say, because how would it happen? But be that as it may, where we sit right now, no object has ever been experienced or found outside of consciousness, outside of the whole. Okay, so all objects rise and fall within consciousness, within the universe, within the whole.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
Right. Definitely.
Thus, all objects are one with consciousness. So there is no such thing as a separate object. Now you can take this a step further. And again, if this doesn't add up, just stop me. If all objects rise and fall, arise and dissolve within consciousness, then all objects must be made of the space in which they arise and fall, must be made of consciousness.
Yes.
It's kind of like, these glasses are made of molecules, this hand is made of molecules, and the air is made of, it's all molecules when you get right down to it from a scientific standpoint.
Right.
So what I'm suggesting is simply that the whirlpools in the sea are not separate entities, it's all the sea.
Right.
The boxes on this computer are not separate entities, it's all the screen.
Mm.
So they appear to be separate entities. The whirlpools appear to be separate whirlpools, but at their core, it's all the sea. So all objects at their core, in truth, are made of consciousness.
Right.
So there are no actual concretized separate objects.
Mm. Right. We're all
So-
unique expressions of that same source. if
Well,
you will.
we're not all. All the things you experience are all unique expressions, but you are not a unique. The idea that you are Evan is a unique expression, but
Right.
Evan is not. You cannot find Evan inside of you can find the idea,
Right.
but you cannot find Evan inside yourself.
Right. Definitely. And when you're able to sort of detach, because, the idea of I am Evan and you are Garrett is just, it's really just something that was given to us to sort of almost rationally explain this perceived experience, if we will, because we have self-awareness, we have rationalization and logic, and it's all to sort of try and logically make sense of what we perceive in the world. And I think when we look at that, we look at history. I was a education and history major in college, so I've done a lot of studying on history. Looking at it, and looking at sort of the psychology of history, you can sort of see how this system of rational and the logical psychology has sort of really played a role in building this foundation to get to where we are today. And I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on the current state of affairs in the world. I mean, whether it be with coronavirus and how we see this, I think this separateness is very much, there's almost an attempt to double down on that. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that and what you see happening, from your perspective.
Well, I think you said it well. In other words, the concept of separation, it had, we could come off the perch in purity and say, well, as far as the world is concerned, it took us so far, which is kind of what you were saying.
Right.
And I think that that's a reasonable thing to say, and I agree with that. But we've taken it too deep. In other words, materialism has now been taken as a true, and by materialism, I simply mean duality. The idea that there is me and there are all these things that are separate from me. There is a subject and an object. So separateness, duality, materialism, I use those words synonymously. So it's simply, materialism is simply not true. And a truth and a lie, sorry, cannot stand, let alone stand as the basis for our culture.
Right.
So ultimately, what we are witnessing is a reckoning, but not a, there are many wise people that I respect, doctors and activists, doctors such as Zach Bush or Tom Cowan, and activists like Ali Zek or Alex Zek, and
They're all wonderful. Yeah.
beyond wonderful, beyond brave, thinking of others too, Deborah Williams, all these beautiful, courageous people. Okay. And they're all offering, which is correct, that we've got to change our behavior. We've got to change our consumptive patterns. This is Zach's big thing, which he's right about. Like, of course we do. There's no way the world is actually overpopulated. It's overpopulated if certain people are going to grab up all the food and all the objects in the world. Sure, right. But so those patterns must change, and those are appropriate and necessary things to point out. Okay. I am pointing out those things from a somewhat different lens. In other words, I'm saying that, it's just use these two political words. It's not capitalism or socialism, it's materialism.
Yeah.
So materialism is the genesis of all isms. And provided we don't clear up the lie that is the foundation of our culture, we will keep living a lie. We've got the basis incorrect. So if we've got the basis incorrect, and I'm not mincing words, it's incorrect, and we have all the proof in the world it's incorrect. I mean, just turn on the news.
Yeah.
For a bunch of different reasons. But unless we clear that up, unless it's seen that all things share a being, it will be impossible to know harmony. The only way we will come to know harmony is to know that all things share a being, a singular being, and we are that being. So you want to have a good marriage, you better understand that, I'm going to say it from my perspective right now, that I better understand that Liz Kramer is a modulation within my being, made of my being, known by my being. She shares my being. If I don't know that, we're fucked.
Yeah.
We could go to marriage counseling till the cows come home. Sadly, most marriage counseling is taught from that you are two separate perspectives, and we've got to do things like know the other person's perspective. No, I don't have to know. There is no other person's perspective. The only thing that we have to know is we share a being. That's intimacy. And what we see right now with coronavirus, flat out, is that we are fighting an enemy, this virus, apparent virus, supposed virus, that cannot be found. Like,
Right.
I can't find an outside enemy a person who's an enemy. I can't find a virus who's an enemy. I can't find a religion that's an enemy. I can't find another country that's an enemy. All of these ideas, these apparent objects, are modulations within consciousness. They're not separate from me. And until we understand that, we will keep spinning our wheels, resisting and fighting the apparent content of our experience. I mean, can you imagine if a sea started to fight the whirlpools within it?
Oh my gosh.
This is what
wouldn't get anywhere.
that's what we're doing.
Right. And I really resonate with what you were saying. And, I spoke with yesterday on my podcast, Jason Christoff, and he was talking about this idea of the invisible enemy. And it's, if you could look at examples of how that's been used throughout history. Again, you look at the war on terrorism, you look at, you could go on and on and on. And this idea of an invisible enemy, and all these systems that we live by. And you pointed out a great example with marriage counseling, and we could say education, we could say our governments. Everything is built on this illusion of separate. It's built on this illusion of I feel control, and control of the structures, control of the hierarchical structures, placing people above one another. That's really what materialism has sort of always done since the beginning of time. And I hear so many people talking about socialism and communism versus capitalism, and where do we find the common ground. And it does sort of all feel like it doesn't address the true questions that we need to answer. And I don't even know if I necessarily have the exact words for those questions, but I can sort of feel what you're talking about, breaking down that illusion of separate and a return.
The only question, buddy, is who am I?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't, this is the fundamental question. It is the only true question. Now, you could ask that question in several ways. So in other words, if I ask you, are you aware or are you conscious? I know the answer. Of course, the answer is yes. But the question is then, who is conscious? Who is aware? Who is it that is aware? And neuroscientists has searched within the human body for 100 years to find the epicenter of this, or the localization of consciousness, with no luck. They can't find how it is that a body can be conscious. Well, I've got news flash for them, for these really smart people. It's not there. Right. They're not going to ever find the epicenter or the localization of consciousness within a human body, because a human body is a localization of consciousness. So they've got the whole shooting match flipped, and thus they've even labeled this issue as the hard problem of consciousness. But they're going to keep searching, because they, like all of us, apparently, we've been so conditioned to be a separate self that they are convinced that they are separate selves. Their training is all based on this misunderstanding that I am a separate self, and they can't shake it. They cannot shake it. So, and this is, when I write things on social media or speak like this, there's a lot of pushback. But what I can't take the time every single post I write that, wait, I'm not speaking from the perspective of a separate self here. You have to understand a virus cannot be out to get us. Now, of course, very smart people like Zach and Tom Cowan, they can explain why that is better than me.
Right.
But the basis for my knowing why that is that there is no separate virus. A virus shares my being. It can't be out to get me. Like, in principle, in truth, that's, you can't prove otherwise. Now,
Right.
someone could say, well, Garret, you're right. No object has ever been found outside of conscious. So where we sit right now, our experience is telling us that separation isn't true, but you're saying that, well, it's all consciousness and that's true. Well, what I'm really saying, Evan, is that based on experience, that's true. I have to leave open the possibility that I'm going to walk out of my office today and see a yellow orangutan in the parking lot. Like there is the possibility of that.
Right.
And I have to leave myself open. And I would suggest everyone leaves themselves open. That's the nature of consciousness, of course, to any possibility. But because that's never happened, physicists, astronomers, astronauts, they can't find an edge to the universe. It keeps expanding, but it's not really expanding. They think there's going to be an edge, but there's never an edge. So we know the universe consciousness is infinite, or it appears to be infinite. Our evidence right now says it's infinite.
Right.
It also appears right now that it's eternal, that nothing can dent it. Now, I'm not saying the earth is eternal. I'm saying the space in which the earth appears is eternal.
Right.
Because no matter what happens within consciousness, it hasn't gone anywhere. So what we know is that consciousness is infinite and eternal based on experience. So I am suggesting we stick to experience and we throw out all these beliefs.
Mm.
So the belief is I am limited and I lack. Okay. Well, I don't know. I am consciousness. Consciousness isn't limited. We just said it, and it doesn't lack. So I am not limited. I am not limited and lacking.
Mm.
Funny enough, I've taught that to the sport world. I still do forever. And sometimes you get a coach say, well, that sounds all cool, but like, give me some practical advice.
Right.
And I said, let me tell you something, coach. Any advice other than that is impractical. like you are infinite and eternal. Now go play. Like, hello, like what else do you want to know? Like you can think positive? Like you think consciousness would ever consider thinking positive? Do you think consciousness would care if a negative thought arose? It'd be okay, whatever, let's go. Like it's so there is no more practical advice than the knowing of your own being. Ramana Maharshi said it. It's the opening quote in my new book. Knowing yourself will be the greatest gift to the world. Mm. And I'm always repeating that. Know who you are and go.
Right.
Don't worry about the other stuff. The other stuff will take care of itself.
Right.
Now, one thing, I don't know that, I think you were kind of hinting at it, but I could be wrong, but it's worth bringing up anyway. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to address the idea of evil.
Yeah.
You're kind of hinting at it before. Now, evil exists, but it exists like a lake in the desert exists. Hmm. And this is essential to point out, in my opinion. We can talk about evil, we can call out evil, we can ignore evil and get on with it, which is ultimately, I think, the most reasonable suggestion, what we all should just do right now. but we don't want to get in the mud with it. And if we recognize evil as an actual entity, not an appearance, not a whirlpool in the sea, but an actual separate thing, and then even say that this person is an embodiment of that, in truth, we're missing it, because ultimately, this is where blame and venom and resistance comes in. And that's going to keep us in the mud. Recognize it, call it out, criticize till the cows come home. But keep in mind that that group, that element, that person that you're calling out is a modulation within you, made of you. And that is how we can actually do some good and actually love, and where we'll find common ground. If we forget that, if we take the so-called evil person to be an outside object, a separate entity, we will spin our wheels, as we've discussed. It's no different than anything else. Sure, do people take a little bit of understanding about what we've talked about today and then appear to spin that around and take advantage of the misinformed? Oh my goodness, for sure. It's the pusher's game. It's the marketer's strategy.
Right.
But that marketer, that pusher, is a modulation within me, made of me. And if I forget that, I will suffer and I will do no good. And I do forget it. And you could even see it in some of the things I say sometimes. And I'm happy to be part of a community that will criticize me, will say, well, gee, get back on track here.
Right.
And I'm not shy about doing that to someone like you. That's what we're here for.
Right.
My wife does it. My children do it to me. My friends, many that you see on social media. And it's vital. It's vital that we do that. We will spin our wheels if we resist the people that seem to be doing a lot of damage. Now, I'm not saying we don't call it out. I want to be clear about that. Like,
Right.
no, I am, we have, where I come from as a young person, like anyone who's abused or bullied I'm not going to stand for that. Like, it's a real thing with me. We're all conditioned. But we must keep in mind and see it for what it is, that all things are modulations of our own being.
Right.
Right. If we lose track of that, we've become part of the problem.
Definitely. And I definitely relate to that, in that it can be easy to almost ostracize, see the evil, and then want to make it separate from the self and not see yourself within that. And I've listened to a bit of Jordan Peterson lately, and he talks about how when he talks about Nazi Germany in particular, how most of the people, if you lived in, let's say, Nazi Germany during World War II, you would have most likely been a Nazi, for example. And just it's sort of the recognition that we are all uh, conditioned. We are all having different upbringings, different, I guess you could say, illusions that were told about to us about the world, about who it is that we're supposed to view ourselves are. And this evil that exists, it exists within duality. It exists within it exists as duality, and exists sort of as part of the whole. And it's easy when we ostracize it, we disconnect from the whole. And it's
I don't know, like, we're just using words. Everyone has their own words,
yeah.
but I don't really even care about the ostracization. Like I don't think and I'm sure you've seen enough of my stuff and you know me well enough to know, like, it's not okay for one apparent modulation within me to abuse another apparent modulation.
Exactly.
This is never okay. And I will do everything in my power, which I'll jump in there and I'll do what I can to not let that happen. But
Right.
what I will not do is serve one of those so-called modulations over the other. In other
Right.
words, while I won't agree even a little bit with abuse, I would never turn my back on the abuser, never ever. And I would obviously never turn my back on the abused, but I am not turning my back on the abuser either. If that abuser said to me, hey, I need your help, I am going to be there in a second. This is very important. Now, I'm not saying I'm great. I'm not saying there are not times when I don't say, you're at it, like, see ya. But that's always a mistake. It's always the veiling of my own being. I've forgotten who I am when that happens. And that's okay. Nothing like, nothing I can do about that. But, I use this analogy that I am never Clark Kent. But I can sometimes think I am. Like I am always Superman, but there are times where I will get so caught up in this so-called game of life that I will actually forget that I am Superman and take on the persona of this nerdy guy who actually thinks he's got to chase Lois Lane. Like, dude, you're Superman. You don't need to chase anything. It's gonna come to you, I promise, right? But we can all, and I can get into an argument with my editor, Perry White. That's what Clark Kent does. Superman's not getting in an argument with anybody. Like, I mean, come on. Like, he'd be like, what am I doing? But this is, I think it's a very important distinction, Evan. And I just hope I'm not like, one of the problems, we've all been conditioned by whatever religion, or most of us, some of us, and all of those religions see us as limited and lacking specks within the universe who must pray to a higher authority.
Right.
I am saying that's materialism. That's part of the issue. You are the higher authority. You are not a speck within the universe. All specks are within you. And that's not even a perfect way to describe it. The only reason I even say within you is because we are so conditioned to think it's outside of you. So we've got to kind of counter that and say within. Sages have been saying, look within for the answers you seek. They didn't mean within a body. What they were saying is if you see the world as appearing within yourself as opposed to outside of yourself, you will find what you're seeking, because you will find yourself. So it's not perfect to say within, but again, it's necessary at this stage of the game.
Right. Definitely. And I would say it's almost as if there isn't the perfect words for it, because it sort of goes beyond the idea of rationality and logic, and how we sort of the world of separate. And what you were saying reminds me of the quote I've heard a few times, and I don't know exactly who said it, but talking about the idea of searching for God, and when you go on that sort of search, you only come back to yourself and looking within and realize.
I searched for God, and I found myself. I actually know that it was a Sufi prophet, but I can't think of the name. But yes, it's yes. There's no step from you to you.
Right.
Right. Unfortunately, we're so conditioned that answers are found in this apparent objective world, or world of objects. We're so taught to seek in that world.
Mm-hmm.
That's the wheel spinning.
Yeah.
And what I suggest is, okay, Mr. John Smith, you think you're a separate self. Okay, we'll go. I'm not going to mess with that just now. But because the nature of a separate self is to seek, a whirlpool is in motion. A separate self cannot just be. It's not going to happen.
Right.
Okay. Because the nature of one who believes he or she is separate, we call that ego. The nature of ego is to seek.
Mm-hmm.
Fine. Seek the nature of yourself then, rather than finding yourself in objects, in acquisitions, in relationships, in substances, in activities. Okay. Okay. No problem with the seeking part. Let's fold mind into heart as opposed to chasing. Let's hold still and explore the nature of who we are. So we're not even initially self-realization or self-exploration could be seen or described as inward seeking. Fine, it's okay. It's fine. But exactly where are we going to go?
Mm-hmm.
And it's up to me in my role as a teacher, as a friend, as a consultant, counselor, coach, whatever, husband, father, to take that seeker, a parent seeker, and spin that seeker back toward source, like the prodigal son. Just come back this way, spin around, pivot in place, so to speak. And once that's done, we realize, oh my God, I never was out there, and there was no out there. This is all happening within me, so to speak. So self-surrender or realization, inquiry, self-exploration, they're all the same thing, is really starts out as an inward seeking, and it ends up as a surrender, as a true surrender. And that's perfectly fine. It's perfectly reasonable way to explain it. The only thing I would say is what changed that 10 years ago when that player said that about the true self was my advice now when I don't mess up is never what's the right word, never keeps the seeker seeking in objects. It's always a spinning back home. Like for example, I'm sure you've experienced this, we all do. You get stuck in a decision.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do? That's pretty much every problem is, what do I do? So I must get this question, like 20 times a day. And my answer is like, I could just press play on my phone or whatever, because that's the same answer every time. I never care about what the decision is about.
Mm-hmm.
Irrelevant. It means nothing. That'll just get me in the mud, in the personal.
Right.
The advice 100 times out of 100, and some people who are listening to this I've said this to them, is make the decision that best represents who you truly are. Make a decision that best allows you to be yourself. Make a decision that best exemplifies peace, happiness, and love. That's it. And once that decision is made, in other words, once the decision is made absent of the personal, not about aggrandizing me, satisfying me. So once the decision is based on who am I in truth, the true self, you sit in that decision and you say, oh my God, this was the only decision. Like, whoa, there was no other decision. It's only when we make the apparent ego-based decision that we're like, what the heck are we doing?
Right.
Always.
Right.
And that's okay. Sometimes if we're, for example, about to reach, sometimes we reach for an old coping mechanism, an old habit. It's fine. It's okay. But once we do it, we're like, what am I doing? It's like 100 times out of 100. It's like, what's the matter with me? Like, why, there's nothing the matter with you. The next time though, just hold still and make a decision here that best exemplifies the infinite and eternal true self.
Right.
And then if the other decision arises, then it does. It's fine. Like, we don't want to make that the enemy, obviously. There is none. But it's interesting how once we make that so-called decision, we then realize, oh my God, this is me. We're home. We're home.
Right.
And I think it's up to each of us to remind each other that it's not about the things that we're conditioned for it to be about. It's not, it's ultimately not. You know, sometimes as a parent of three, my children are 28, 26, and 23. I get asked this question like, oh, that's all well and good, G, but hey, don't you want your children to have a nice house and kids and a great life? And I could tell you, like, the answer to that question, in all honesty, is no. The only thing I want for my children is for them to be true to themselves. There's nothing else that I want. I want them to know who they are and stand as that infinite and eternal self. And that's it. And that's all I want for everyone. And because at the end of the day, nothing else is going to matter. I mean, nothing's going to matter.
Right.
But in order to stand as the self, knowingly stand as the self, we have to know who we are to begin with.
Right. That was beautifully put. And it reminds me, I've listened to a lot of Russell Brand in the past, and he's very open about his troubles with addiction and substance abuse and detaching from fame. And, he talks about the need for him living in conscious awareness to source. And, I've been very much just trying to apply that in my own life, where I get caught up in certain frustrations or have certain tendencies that I recognize as sort of conditioned patterns and the belief systems that stem from lack. And it's like when it connected to source, it's like the answers are all sort of all right there. Like, you don't need to go seeking them, and it's just a matter of living in conscious awareness connected to that. And I think there's
Well,
different.
Yes, but I wouldn't worry. I'm not saying you are, but I wouldn't worry about, like, I wouldn't try to live in conscious awareness. In other words, you're because you already are.
Right.
And one way to look at that is that, I'm just thinking, I get this question all the time, like, don't you see separation? Well, yes, I see separation. What I'm looking out the window here in my office, and this is a row of old houses that have been converted to offices here in Morristown. And so there's a house like 50 feet from I'm looking at. I'm seeing the windows, I'm seeing the roof, I'm seeing the distance cars behind it. I see you, I see the computer that you're on. I see a box of this good-looking guy named Garret. But yes, we see separation. We have been so conditioned, trained to see separation that that's not going away.
Right.
Okay. However, what's toast is the belief that the separation I see is true. So the illusion forever remains once we see it. However, we now know that it is not true. It is not a fact. There is no such thing as a separate self made of matter. Of course it's not. I mean, scientists can't even find matter, but that's a whole nother discussion. Just like neuroscientists can't find consciousness within a body. There is the scientific hints of all of this. There's hints of all of this in the so-called material world. Okay. But be that as it may, the illusion remains. It's kind of like in sport. you're playing this in the game 7 of the World Series,
Mhm.
and you kind of know, hopefully, that it's just a game. Like
Right.
you're just going to dive in knowing that it's just a game. Like it's the player that thinks it's life or death, that thinks his or her identity is attached to the outcome or the fact that they're even a player in the first place, whatever, that would really suffer. And that's ultimately what I've lent to the world of sport. I've really, and also in performance and act for mainly in stage here in New York, but the know yourself and then jump in and go play the game. Know that the dream's going to play out how the dream's going to play out. The dreamer is not moving. The dreamer is not going anywhere. The dreamer cannot be affected. But the dreamer can jump back in to the dream and have a ball, knowing that the dreamer is sleeping the whole time. It's all, nothing's happening. And when Jesus said, be in the world, not of the world, this is what he meant. Go know yourself and then go back into this apparent world from that perspective of freedom, that perspective of I am infinite and eternal. When fear arises, it's seen as simply a modulation. It's not a problem. I don't need to protect myself. I don't need to arm up. I don't need to take a vaccine. I don't even need to eat these oranges that you see me eating here. I not to make myself powerful, not to make myself immune. I eat them because I don't know. It just seems what I should eat them.
Right.
That's why I'm eating them. Like, it's funny. I'm not doing it to try to up my protection level.
Right.
That's the same thing as taking a vaccine, for Pete's sake, right?
Right.
So, you know, the world will appear to be a world of separation. The question we must ask ourselves is, A, is that true? But more profoundly, is that actually happening outside of me, or is it happening within me? And as we've discussed, I don't know how it could be happening outside. Like it can't be separate from me. I would not know the world then.
Right.
So, yeah, we've really narrowed it down, Evan, to the knowing of our own being. Like, who are you? Who are we?
Right. Definitely.
What I've done is, and I get a lot of grief from a lot of people, but like in the non-dual community, so to speak, sometimes I'm criticized for even taking this understanding to the performance world, or even to a situation like coronavirus, or to health and well-being. I don't care. I can criticize. I'm not. That's just what I'm going to do. I mean, I'm not going to stop doing it. It's fine. But my life has been one of coaching. I can't shake the fact that I'm still a hockey coach at heart, who wants to serve his players. Like it's not going to happen. Like this, I've tried,
Right.
but it's not going to happen. And I don't think there's anything I can do for the players that's more important than pointing those players back to the nature of who they are. And
Right.
yeah, I'm just doing my best to do that.
Right. Well, and that was beautiful, and I think you're doing a great job at doing that, and just
Yeah.
based on the message that you put out, and because for all of the, you talk about getting criticism. For all the criticism, I also see loads and loads of support on, your work and the message, and I think this is, pointing back to the self. I think is it's really our only path forward, and um, I suppose to like wrap up this conversation, what are your thoughts moving forward when we look to the future, and you know, everything that's the plans that are in place by these forces that we've talked about, and they want to mandate the vaccines, and they want to, it seems like they want to double down on this system of separate. I truly believe in the notion that this a return to what's true is inevitable. And I mean, I would love your thoughts on that if you believe that as well, and um, the direction that we are going, because I feel that more and more people are discovering, you know, the inward, looking inward, as we put it.
It's going to sound ominous, and then I'm going to, but just ride with the ominous for a second, okay?
All right.
And then it'll come back around. As we discussed earlier, a lie cannot stand. So a culture built, a world built on, call it materialism, separateness, as you just said, will not last. Now, one of two things will then happen, as I can describe them from a worldly perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because materialism is going, okay? That's
Right.
happening. I don't know when it's going, so to speak, if time was a thing, you know what I mean? But
Right.
it's going, okay? The question is the human race going with it? The human race as we know it going with it? Or are we going to wake up to it, and it's going to go, and we're going to get our act together as we are now, so to speak, in this current, form of humanity?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I would describe it. In other words, materialism's toast. Now, again, when it's toast, and this is another reckoning in it becoming toast, which is kind of what you're sensing, right? And
Yeah.
me too. No doubt about it. If I had to be frank about it, I don't think it will happen in what I would describe as my lifetime. But that's okay. I mean, that's okay. Like, whatever, like, who knows, right?
Right.
So materialism goes. Do we live in harmony as currently constituted, where the things that Zach and Tom and Ali and Alec and Deborah, et cetera, are pointing out? Like, are we going to get our act together and start to really have true equality on earth, so to speak? Like the absence of hierarchy, as you were saying before? It was really well said. It sounds great, man. Like, like, what do we need?
Right.
What do we need? Like, that's all we need. Like, what do we need? A house, a big car? Like, what do we need? And we need everyone to have the same, because they are the same. And this isn't a discussion. Like, this is like, that's the way will eventually be.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's say the conflict is too great, the misunderstanding is too great, and this planet implodes. Here's what I want everyone to know. We're going to be okay. In other words, consciousness, the true self, isn't going anywhere. You are infinite and eternal. We are infinite and eternal, and nothing, either way, whichever scenario, we're going to be fine. It's only from this perspective that we are a separate self that the first scenario becomes a little daunting. But that's part of the lie. So, and I actually, in the second to last section of this new book that I'm writing, I'm done writing it, we're in edits now. I mentioned this very thing, this exact thing, like, and the title of this section is "We Will Survive." In other words, if this happens, don't worry, we're going to be fine. And that is why the knowing of our own being allows us. It's why Ali Zek is so brave. because she knows that she's not going anywhere, even if someone was to come in and do something. Like, she's fine. She knows that. Like, there's an underlying sense of her own being there. And that's why she's so courageous, because she knows she's fine either way. Like, you can't touch me.
Right.
Like, Jesus, string me up. Go ahead. You can't touch me. I'm not gonna bow down to what you're saying. King, I'm not gonna not speak up. Bobby Kennedy, bring it. I'm not, do whatever. But his son too right now. He's so proud of his son. So there's that knowing that no matter what goes down here, Evan, we're gonna be okay. And sure, it seems like that's easy to speak about in a sporting event, but it's actually the same thing. Life is a game. We jump in that game, a game or a dream, however you want to describe it. We jump in that game. We know that we're infinite and eternal, and we go have at it. And we're going to be okay no matter how it plays out. So I don't know which scenario in this dream is going to happen, okay? I know materialism's going. I know there's many wonderful people, we spoke about some of them here today, that are moving in that direction, and the communities that they're part of that are moving in this direction. And we just have to keep going. We have to, in my opinion, we must continue to call out the lie. And as we do, understand that lie is part of us. And if we can do that, I think we're going to move mountains here. And these kind of conversations are so essential, and for us to just keep happening. And it's not all kumbaya and like all that and songs of unity. There's no unity. Mm-hmm. There's no such thing as unity. You would need separateness to have unity. We can't be disunion. So right. So we just need to keep coming back to the essence of our own being, our singular being, and let the chips fall where they may.
Right. I definitely agree with you. And that was so beautifully articulated.
Oh yeah. Well,
beautifully articulated.
No, I'm old.
It's perfectly describes what I'm feeling about it as well. And you put it in better words than I ever could. So awesome. So
just put it your way. Just put it your way. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right. So Garret, we're at about an hour. I mean, this conversation flew by, and I feel like it's, I definitely am feeling empowered afterwards, and, connected to source. Feeling really good. So
you are, yeah. That's what happens when we look in this direction. It's virtually impossible not to. The material world just goes.
Right.
And here we are. We're home. So.
Yeah, definitely. So is there any place that you would want to send the listeners, to connect with you further, where they can find your work and, sort of engage with you in these ideas more?
If anybody wants to, they can always reach out. But I guess, social media stuff, I think Instagram's a great community. So that's where I would first tell you to go. But my website is just myname.com. And then if anyone wants to reach out to me, just send me an email. It's all there. So right. GarretKramer.com. Garret has one T, but if you spell it with two, it'll come to that site also, because everyone makes that mistake. I never understood it. That's okay.
Oh, wonderful. All right. So you guys can spell it wrong and you'll still get there. That's
fine. You can mess it up and still get there. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.